We should say Dr. Matt Wetstein has a PhD, and he's currently president of Cabrillo College, and he's going to speak to us about new and exciting programs at Cabrillo.
So I get clipped up here, and hopefully you can hear me in the back. And I have a bit of a PowerPoint display that I'm going to go through with you as well. So I may be walking around the podium a little bit to advance the slides. So thank you for the invitation and for letting me be here. So let me talk a little bit about the agenda that I have for my discussion, and I'll leave time at the end for question and answers. First, I'll do a little bit of introduction about myself, celebrate some of the work that Cabrillo has been doing for the last year and a half, at least since I've been here as president of Cabrillo. We'll talk about some of the initiatives that we have running at the college that are relatively new, and some of the planning that we're doing, both in strategic planning and then thinking about facilities needs for the colleges. And towards the end, leave some time for question and answers. So in terms of a little bit of background before I jump into accomplishments, before coming to Cabrillo, was at Delta College, San Joaquin Delta College in Stockton for 22 years. And I started as a political science professor and was relatively young, right out of graduate school at Northern Illinois University when I got that job. I came to California because my wife actually got a job at University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. And at the same time that UOP grad?
Yes.
Wonderful. Cindy got her job offer about a week ahead of a job offer that I got. We were both coming out of the same PhD program. And mine was at University of Evansville in southern Indiana. Hers was out here. We opened the map, looked at the list of schools that were around Sacramento and Stockton and said, let's go west. And so that's how I ended up here as a trailing spouse, and never regretted it. Was lucky enough to get a job teaching political science and then worked as a dean at the college. I got involved in the faculty union when I was there, became president of the union and faculty senate leader while I was at Delta College. Became a dean, became a vice president of instruction and planning. And then when this job came open at Cabrillo in 2017 and was advertised, I just took a chance at it and was so blessed to get it. So very happy to be here. So let me talk a little bit about some of the accomplishments. I just want to start with a description of the college and the students we serve and how the high school going rate of graduates who enroll at Cabrillo College is. We have 45% of our students are Hispanic at this point. We serve about 17,000 students a year head count and a little under 10,000 full-time equivalent students. So a lot of our students are part-time. But the college-going rate coming out of the high schools when they graduate is really quite amazing for this county. So our largest feeder schools in terms of percentage of students enrolling are typically from the South County, from Watsonville High School, Pajaro Valley, and then also from Harbor High School. So 70% of the students from Aptos, Harbor, and Watsonville who graduate end up enrolling at Cabrillo College. And for Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo Valley, which is a little more further removed, a little bit more of a drive, even those schools will have 45 to 55% of the students who graduate end up attending Cabrillo. So most people don't realize how much of the student population that's coming out of high school is actually enrolling at Cabrillo first before they go on for a transfer degree at a four-year university. So we're quite proud of that data. And when our students transfer to the CSU and UC system, one of the things we know from following and tracking grade studies and performance data is that our students, when they transfer, actually outperform the students who enroll first at CSU and UC campuses in terms of grade point average. One of the reasons we know that and why that happens is that once they've completed at Cabrillo, they're pretty motivated to transfer and finish that degree. And so it's still a point of pride for us, for me to be able to go up to the UC provost or chancellor and say, you want our students, and I know why. So we've had some really wonderful accomplishments since I started February 1 of 2018, so I've been here about 16 months. One of the points of pride for Cabrillo is the foundation and community support that we get from contributors and people who support the college. So as a foundation, we have roughly $35 million in assets on any given day. But last year we had $4 million in contributions to the foundation. $2 million of that went directly to support the school's operations and student scholarships. So typically what the foundation will do is grant over dollars to the tune of about $2 million. Half of that will support directly students who are attending to give them scholarship money for the cost of attendance. So it helps buy books, pay tuition, pay their rent, transportation, and things like that. The other half of that money actually goes to support programs that faculty apply for from the foundation to support purchase of equipment, technology, things like the dental hygiene program, who put in requests every year that the foundation ends up supporting. And I can tell you from being in the Central Valley that the foundation support here is off the charts, much higher than it was in the Central Valley. So I'm really quite proud of that. Some other accomplishments from the year when I first started, our Ethics Bowl team, which is quite unique, qualified for the national championships and ended up taking 7th place nationally in spring of 2018. They had to beat Stanford and Arizona State to get out of the Western region. And it is so nice to be able to talk about our team beating Stanford with Stanford grads. Do we have any Stanford grads in the room? Sorry, but Cabrillo was winners of the West. Really phenomenal group. We also had a basketball player for the first time last year, Linton Aclies, I always have trouble pronouncing his name, who was the first Cabrillo basketball player in history, so now 60 years of operation. First one ever in history to be a 2-time All-State player for our team. Took him to the playoffs, ended up transferring to San Francisco State and is now playing for them as well. And just the nicest gentleman you'd ever meet as well. Last spring we had our women's beach volleyball team become the first state champion from the North ever in the history of beach volleyball. So we are our volleyball record, and both on court and on sand, is quite a run of success. Last year we had a record number of graduates, just under 1,200 for associate's degrees, and just last week at our graduation we had 1,476 students receive associate's degrees, the largest graduating class ever in the history of the college. By 25%. It was quite amazing. And with that, what we're seeing too are record numbers of transfer students. So last year we had a record number accepted into UC Santa Cruz. I will say in part because they have been pressured by the university system to accept more transfer students than they have in the past. And so in talking with George Blumenthal when I first got here, he was mentioning that they were going to ramp up the number of transfer students, and we were the largest admitted class came out of Cabrillo College last fall. Excuse me, I'm fighting a bit of a cold too, so if I need to take a sip, I might do that. A couple of other big accomplishments. Last year we opened a makerspace on our campus that is a point of pride for the college. We have, this makerspace has 3D printing technology and other forms of ways to manufacture large and small pieces, both for art, for engineering. And one of the things that's distinctive about it is our students are interning through the makerspace with local employers. One of the most interesting examples of a success story there is a student who worked in the makerspace, got picked up by a local company called Cruise Foam, which makes surfboards. And they had an interest in wanting to design a surfboard made out of the material of shells from shrimp. So the waste product from shrimp processing, instead of just throwing it away, use that to manufacture something useful. One of our interns from art actually worked with the company to help master that product. And they ended up deciding that it wasn't necessarily the best way to use the material because it was a thick, inch or 3/4 inch thick boards are not quite useful for that. But they ended up designing through that work new food processing packaging material. So think of the hamburger shells or sandwich shells that are used to ship or store food in fast food. Imagine those being made out of the waste product of shrimp shell casings. That's essentially a product that was developed out of a student working through our makerspace for a local employer. They ended up hiring that intern. He's now making a lot of good money for them. We have wonderful arts programs. I'm sure some of you have attended them. Cheryl Anderson last year was the Artist of the Year in Santa Cruz County for our chorus, who's a wonderful. They're just about to depart for a tour to South Africa this month. Our NASA Swarmathon sort of robotics engineering team competed nationally, made it to the quarterfinals, and lost on a tiebreaker to try to get into the semifinals last year. We still want to challenge the scoring on that. I think it was held in Florida, so I'm skeptical of the vote counting. Dental hygiene was mentioned earlier. Last year we had a 100% successful pass rate on the dental hygiene exam. Quite proud of that program. I found out when I moved here, when I first went for a dental cleaning, former Cabrillo student I was in the chair, and the former Cabrillo student was discovering she was working on the Cabrillo President. So an hour later. We also have launched two new things that are quite distinctive this spring. Just recently, an ag tech program, an associate in arts program, that is designed to train students for careers in agriculture around the tech sector and ensuring that they're computer literate and know how to fix or operate and run software packages that are increasingly being used in the agricultural sector. And then with that, we're using a federal grant that we got to build and have built a new greenhouse for the Ag Tech program for research that's being done within that greenhouse and other parts of our site for horticulture on things like different lighting techniques for growing water systems. And it's designed to be a sustainable agriculture degree program that is going to be training our students really well, not only in the application of software, but sustainable ag techniques so that they can either go right into the workforce or transfer into four-year schools like Cal Poly or Fresno State, Chico State, and so on. Okay, let me talk about a couple of other new initiatives that have been introduced. One of them is probably the most important change for our college is the way that we are handling high school students who are arriving with their English and math coursework and admission into our English and math courses. Under the old model of placement, we used to tell students, hold on, we want you to take a test in order to assess your math skills and your English skills. And the typical result of that test that they had not studied for, did not know the stakes of the test, was that we would tell the student, you're not ready for college, and you need to take this remedial math and English course to get college ready. That has been, in my opinion, one of the most discriminatory practices that our college system could ever implement. Because typically the students who were told that they needed remedial education were Hispanic students, African American students throughout our state. So increasingly what we're moving to is what's called a multiple methods approach to placement that asks the student to do two things. One, we're going to ask you to take a test, but we're also going to look at your high school grades in English and math. And if you did well enough in high school algebra, or if you did well enough in your high school English coursework, we're going to admit you directly into our college level math and college level English coursework based on your grades in high school, regardless of how you do on the test. And actually what we do is we take either of the methods that's better for the student. So if they do well on a test and didn't have decent grades, we let them into the coursework. If they did well in the courses in high school but don't perform well on the test, we let them into the college level courses. The result of that, we started last fall, this new practice. We had some sections that had co-requisite courses for some extra lab time if they needed it. Students in English, the grade and successful completion rate did not change, despite the fact that we were admitting 75% of our students directly into college level English, whereas in the past it was only 25%. So we almost doubled the number of students who completed college level English in one semester compared to the prior year. In math, the success rate went down a little bit. But the volume of students who actually finished college stats or college algebra went up by 250 students. And so the volume increased even though the percentage of pass rate went down. And I think that that's partly because we didn't have enough math professional development going into this. And I think we'll get better at that as we go forward. But this is the single biggest policy change that I've ever seen in 25 years of working for community colleges that's had a positive impact on disproportionate rates of success. And so it's really going to change our landscape for successful completion by Hispanic students, quite frankly. And so I'm most proud of this. Of anything you walk away from today, Cabrillo's change on math and English placement is the biggest game changer ever that I've ever seen. So proud of our faculty. I think the second initiative I would highlight is the one we announced last year, right after I got here, called the College Promise Program, which was being debated in the legislature at that time. But this is a program that's designed for high school students coming right out who are coming to the community college. If they enroll full-time at the college and they keep a grade point average of 2.0, their tuition is free. That full year. No cost tuition for 1 year. This year, we're going to extend that to a second year of the program. So the Cabrillo College promise of 1 year free tuition will now become 2 years free tuition, as long as you stay full-time and are maintaining a 2.0 grade point average. So it's a really wonderful program. I will give some credit. I need to give credit to the legislature and the governor for being very forward-thinking in freeing up the dollars during this economic growth cycle to say this is worth funding. It goes back to the old model of the California Education Master Plan from the 1960s. If some of you are around for that and benefited from it, during that period from Pat Brown's era, the community college was always designed to be free for 100%, top 100% of every graduating high school class. And then the CSUs were supposed to admit the top 30%, the UCs the top 10%. Well, now we're beginning to get movement and traction back towards that model of free access to public higher education, at least at the community college level, through this kind of a program. This is very hard to read. I'm not going to ask you or quiz you on this. This is our framework for our strategic plan at the college. And the thing that I want to introduce about this is that it's a different way of thinking about strategic planning. What we're introducing is a framework for thinking about how the college operates on sort of two axes. One is to think of what is it we want our community to be benefiting from? What are the metrics we want to follow in terms of Cabrillo success? And so going across the top, you'll see highlights like completion and transfer. We want our students to complete. We want them to transfer to four-year institutions. We want them prepared for the labor market for good, wage-sustaining jobs that are going to sustain a family. We want to ensure that when we're offering our courses, they're relevant, they're learning stuff that's relevant towards their four-year degree or towards a labor market job. And we want to make sure that our students are equitably graduating and have equitable access to our courses. And then going down the vertical axis are some things that we can do as a college to try to change to get better at those metrics. Implement policies and practices to improve transfer and completion. Make sure that we've got good professional development for our staff and our faculty to do that. Hire the right kind of people. Communicate and engage with the community to help us do these things. And make sure that we can acquire the technical and physical resources to ensure the students are going to learn, get out, and get jobs. And so I'm asking the college, and through a sort of internal working group, we've developed this framework with these statements of things that we want to be focused on over the next couple of years. And if we do this right, what we'll see are increases in our completions, increases in our transfer rates. We'll have more of our students getting out with jobs directly from our certificate offerings. And most importantly, the equitable completion rates of African American students and Hispanic students will start to get inching up closer and closer to our white student completion rates. So if we track our metrics well over the next 4 or 5 years, and we stay focused on this strategic plan, I think we're going to be very successful as a college and keep moving that graduation number up and up and up. So I'm pretty excited. I don't like talking strategic planning with audiences. People's eyes glaze over. They start to fall asleep. They nod. But that's where we're going as a college in thinking about what we do on a day-to-day basis. I will push our staff and faculty to be writing annual plans, asking for resources to fit this matrix. If it's not fitting this matrix, it's not going to get funded, is going to be the message from the top. Okay, let me talk then about some of the challenges we face. So good news, now a little bad news. I first came to Cabrillo. The chancellor's office and the governor last year started talking about changing the way community colleges are funded. And there was a major reform that went through the legislature last May and June that radically altered the way we got funded. The old system was 100% funding was based on how many students you enrolled. So in the vernacular, it was how many butts in the seats, that's how much money you get, right? The new model has shifted to a performance-based accountability funding system, very much like the K-12s have been asked to do, K-12 districts. So now only 70% of our money is based on enrollment, full-time equivalent students, or FTEs it's called. And then 10% of our funding is tied to how well we do on completion, transfer, completion of degrees, certificates, and so on. And then 20% is based on metrics associated with how many poor students are we serving. Students who qualify for Pell Grants and federal financial aid, or students who qualify for the fee reduction for tuition waiver, or students who are undocumented immigrants. That has been a real radical shift for colleges like Cabrillo and other colleges up and down the coast of California, because the demographics of our district are different from many other districts throughout the state. And I'll point to two examples here. Cabrillo has, as a population of students, one of the higher percentages of students over the age of 50. So 11% of the student body are over the age of 50. Our average age is 28. The district I came from in the Central Valley had only 2% of students over the age of 50, and the average age was 24. So I want you to think about the completion metrics that focus on completion of associate degrees or transfer to a four-year university, right? Students over the age of 50 typically are not looking to finish a degree. They don't want to transfer to a four-year school. They want to take 2 or 3 courses, maybe 1 course for life enrichment or cultural enrichment. It might be a language class, it might be arts. It may be that they're taking a computer class or a business class to help maybe skill up a little bit in their career. But they are not, intentionally, they're not looking to finish a degree. So the funding formula on its face, right out of the gate, has an impact on districts that have large populations of students who are older, retirees, who take courses, right? San Francisco has 25% of its student population over the age of 50.
Wow.
25%. So the funding formula harms districts like ours, Monterey Peninsula, Napa, Marin, some Orange County districts where there are large concentrations of retirees throughout the state. And because of that, the funding formula actually works to only provide to our college what's called a cost of living or COLA provision. Other districts, however, that have those other demographic drivers are doing much better under the funding formula. Here's how it looks, and you're not going to be able to see this, but I'm going to explain this very quickly. This is a chart of the growth in funding for each community college district under the formula for the first year. So this current year that we just finished. There were several districts on the very far left of this graph that got 40 and 30% increases in their first year under the funding formula. Imagine a district getting a 40% increase in revenue in 1 year. On the far end over here are the COLA districts that I was mentioning, the ones that only qualified for a cost of living adjustment, got no accountability dollars at all. Cabrillo is the 5th college on that bar chart over here at the end. So you had colleges that were getting 2.71% increases over here and 30 and 40% increases over there, right? I've popularized this and sent it around to all the CEOs of community colleges in the state. And as soon as I did it, I got 10 minutes later a phone call from the chancellor of the system. What are you doing? Right? Just pointing out how the funding formula works. Not a good conversation. But it made the point that there are serious disparities in funding that were triggered by this new system, and now it's under debate even this week as we're going through the end of this legislative session. So one of the things I was saying earlier to Barbara was that I've been amazed at the amount of work that I spent in my first year talking to legislators in Sacramento and defending the funding formula or trying to make changes to the funding formula as we go forward. So little side story on this, and then I'll move off of it. After this graph got put out, I think I did it last September, there started to get some traction around the idea of capping at 10% the amount that a district can grow in any 1 year under this formula. So I want you to imagine that those bar charts would come down, and imagine some of that funding might get circulated over to lift the other side of that chart a little better. And so some of that language is being inserted into the governor's budget proposal. He actually put into the request 10% cap on funding increases back in the January budget proposal. So I feel like we're making some progress, but the first year out was quite dramatic in its disparity. The other challenge I want to focus on is the challenge that our students face, many of them, dealing with the cost of education and just the cost of living. There's been some work by Sarah Goldrick-Rab out of Temple University in Philadelphia on incidences of homelessness and food insecurity among community college students particularly. And Cabrillo participated in a survey last fall of students asking them about their concerns around housing. How often do you skip meals? How often do you sleep on a couch or have to sleep with friends? And the percentage of students at Cabrillo who said that they had been homeless at one point in the last 12 months was 22%. That's more than 1 in 5 of our students saying that they had been homeless within the last 12 months. And a good 50% of them had said that they had experienced some form of food insecurity, skipping meals, or weren't sure where their next meal was coming from within the last month. And so our students are facing real economic challenges that are different, I think, from the way I experienced college and the way many of us experience college. The Pell Grant does not cover as much as it used to as a percentage of funding the living expenses of a student. That has been capped for years. And the aid that is provided through the California Cal Grant system does not cover, for community college students, anything beyond tuition. And I want to highlight that difference between a 4-year student attending a 4-year university and a community college student. Cal Grants currently given to community college students do not cover costs beyond tuition. So living expenses, food, transportation, books, not covered. If you're a 4-year CSU UC student, those costs are covered by a Cal Grant. So 70% of the current Cal Grant dollars that are spent go to CSU UC 4-year students. Only 7% go to community college students. Only 7% of Cal Grant dollars go to community college students, although they make up 70% of higher ed students in the state. So one of the major reforms being debated this spring is to right that wrong and to lift the Cal Grant to cover those other costs of education for students in our system. And there's been some success. Right now, the question is whether it gets funded. It's passed the Education Committee, went through appropriations, and is now a subject of debate between the governor and the Big Five budget negotiations right now. That would be the single biggest change to support our students in my history in community colleges. You know, I talked about that placement reform. This would really accomplish some economic good for our students. And I talked about this in one Rotary presentation recently. And someone asked me a question, well, isn't that essentially subsidizing students with taxpayer money from California? Why should we do that? And my argument back was to say, you're correct, it is subsidizing higher education for our students at our community college system. But every dollar that you're talking about are dollars that are spent in our community. They're spent at our college, they're spent at your restaurants or locally at our gas stations, at our grocery stores, and so those dollars circulate through our economy. And let's be frank, those are dollars that are helping the most economically marginal folks in our society right now. Those are good dollars spent in my mind. So let me move on and shift a little bit to what's next for Cabrillo. In terms of priorities, last fall when I was talking to the faculty and staff, I put out the challenge. I wanted the college to grow its achievement and completion rate for degrees and certificates by 20% over the next 2 years. We did it in 1 year. We just finished that graduation last week, and we did some things internally to make it easier for students to graduate. One of the things that bothered me the most was, and most colleges do this, you have to fill out an application to graduate and receive your degree. Why? They finish the courses, give them the degree. Don't create stupid barriers that prevent them from getting a completion, right? So dismantling some of those institutional barriers, well, that's the way we've always done it. That stuff drives me crazy. So we did some of that to help increase the number of graduates. We did the changes in placement reforms. That's going to help increase the number of graduates as well. I'm going to continue to advocate for our students in our community on the funding formula. We're expanding dual enrollment. We're working now with each of the school districts, and each school district this month and our board is adopting dual enrollment agreements that will allow Cabrillo to offer community college courses directly to high school students in closed classes that only high school students can take, that are linked to either a certificate program at our school for a career program, or that are clear transfer pathway courses that they can use to transfer anywhere. So each school district will have an increasing number of students who are taking Cabrillo classes in their high school with only high school students and closed off to any adults coming into the class. So dual enrollment will be growing and at all of the high schools across our county. And then I'm going to close with some comments about institutional stewardship of our facilities and our needs that we have as a community college. I know that before I came here, there was a failed bond measure in 2016. And I've talked to a lot of people, both internally in the college and local politicians, other people who just come and tell me why they think the bond failed. But I do want to advocate a little bit for Cabrillo's needs, both on technology and in renovating some of the spaces that we have. We have done some good things. There's a bullet up here that mentions Prop 39 measures for some money-saving features that have been implemented by the college. So very unsexy stuff, like replacing the boilers for the pool. If you think about boiler systems that were built in the 60s and 70s, they were not built with energy efficiency in mind. And so we've introduced those kinds of savings. Lighting fixtures throughout the campus. Imagine parking lots, all the lights in hallways, classrooms, restrooms, facilities, offices, all are now being retrofitted and reinstalled with LED lighting. And so the energy savings that we generate off of those kinds of changes, while not sexy, end up saving money so that we can put it back into the operations of the college. So we're doing those kinds of things. One of the projects we took on right after I got here, I walked the football field and spent some time looking at tears. It was a 15-year-old surface, and there were some player safety issues, I would argue, on that field. And so I went to the board and asked for some reserve dollars to be spent on that project. And so I want you to think about that. We're eating into our reserve account for some capital improvement projects that we have to do. That's a little dangerous, but the reason we're having to do that is we don't have bond dollars and we don't have deferred maintenance money flowing into the budget from the state. Because that's always the one account the legislature and the governor target every year if they have to save dollars. So for several years we went without deferred maintenance money. This is what the athletics program brought to me as a possible turf replacement. You may be able to see that. Does that remind you of any place?
Boise State.
Where is that?
Boise State.
Boise State, the blue field, correct?
Yep.
We did not do that. Correct. Say that louder.
Birds land in it. They think it's water.
Correct. So, you know, our mascot is the Seahawk. We prefer not dead Seahawks, you know, sort of landing on the field. So one of the things I also learned through this project was that Boise State has a trademark on any non-green athletic surface of any kind. And so if we were to have tried to build a blue field, we would have had to get permission from Boise State University's president, which I wasn't about to do. Plus I like birds, so we decided not to do that. So we just finished this project. We had our first graduation on it last week. It's a green turf with a Seahawk logo in the center. We actually, I think, I don't know that we did blue even in the center, but this was $1 million project to tear out old turf, put in new turf, and the underlaying base. The one thing I'll say about it is that the old systems that were installed back in the 90s, early 2000s, had those rubber pellets from tires. That stuff's gone. So the infill that you now see in these modern systems are cork and coconut husk infills that are essentially organic materials that are not going to do harm to the students and athletes on the field. So, and when you walk it, it really does feel like a soccer field when you're on it as well. Here's another example, just really quickly. We spent a little over $100,000 tearing out the old original bleachers from our gymnasium, which if you've ever been to a basketball game or volleyball there, no handrails. And so when you're walking on them, there's no safety concerns at all. And they were getting old. And these are newly installed. I just took a photo of Mark Stewart, our athletic director, yesterday. That entire bleacher set on one side is controlled by a push-button remote control that will move back and forth. The old ones you had to pull out and set up. Each front row has 8 sections for wheelchair inserts where you can simply push in a little bit and have wheelchair seating right on the court. That was not envisioned in the old days. And each of those has railings going up the aisles for safety as you're climbing the stairs. So those kinds of improvements are the things that we need to do that are accessible, ADA equipped, and address some needs that we have at the college. So what possibly could happen next year is a bond measure asked to voters in the district. And I'm sensitive to that. We just finished doing some polling with voters in the district to ask about level of support that they might be comfortable with for a bond measure. Embedded within that ask were 3 major projects that are sort of the signature projects that would be featured in that bond. One is a new science center. So STEM education, we are doing currently in a 1962 era building. So you have to imagine the high school labs that you and I might have been taught in is the space that we're working in, or renovated spaces from that era. I don't think that's appropriate for a 21st century community college to be training students for 21st century STEM careers. I want the students to be engaged in classrooms and labs that are going to have the materials and the equipment that they're going to use when they transfer to the next stage and when they get into a lab that's run at places like, the one I just saw, which blew me away, was at Driscoll's. Driscoll's analysis of the berries that they're producing is done down to the genetic level to produce the best berry that they can produce. Disease resistant and high quality taste and smell and touch. And so you go into Driscoll's and you see a 21st century science lab that's doing the genetic testing that they need to make sure they get the best quality product. That's the equipment I want our students to experience in our classrooms. And in order to do that, we've got to do some spending for it, and we're going to need support for it. The other thing that I want to focus on is the way that students learn and the way that people operate in our current economy is much more collaborative and community-oriented and project-based in the way that projects are done now in the workforce and in our economy. So in order to enhance that, you need to think of the old library being converted into a new kind of library, where collaborative learning spaces are the norm, not the difference from the norm. So that means more study spaces that are communal, where project-based learning can take place. So it's more specific group learning rooms sprinkled throughout the campus, but particularly in our library, that would enhance the ability of our students to collaborate as they learn through our programs and get ready to work in projects as they move on. And then finally, the other signature project is a consolidated student services building that would be sort of the one-stop shop approach to finding counseling, advising help, financial aid, assistance. And to locate that in our 200 building, which is sort of facing the Soquel Drive area, but currently closed off and not being used at all. So that would be a major renovation of that space. and a high-profile area of our campus. Add in a couple of other renovation programs and public safety training center, and you get to about $270 million. And I'll just close with a quick snapshot of what the college looks like at Aptos, sort of from a bird's eye level. On the left-hand side is the current plan. On the right, there's sort of the facilities master plan vision of what we would do if we could change everything. By the way, changing everything costs way too much money. There's more than $700 million worth of projects on there. And we're not going to go and ask voters for $700 million. It's crazy. But there are some projects to highlight here. If I just pinpoint them, sort of towards the top of that graph, the second highlighted building, sort of in the center, is the Replacement Science Center, which would be at the center of our campus, essentially the center of the quad where the flagpole is, up on the Aptos campus next to the library. And the Student Services building is just below that, sort of along Soquel Drive. That would be that one-stop shop center for students.
Can you come a little closer, kind of point
Sure.
so that we can tell? It's hard to understand what you're pointing.
Absolutely. I got to make sure I can extend all the way without killing anyone. This is the Replacement Science Center. The current library is right here. So major renovation of this space to allow for more collaborative learning. There are a couple of buildings in here right now, the footprint existing, that you would have to blow up and then build the STEM center in. And in order to do all of that, in blowing those up, you're moving counseling. All the counselors where they're located right now are in a building 100 right here. They would go into this modernized, renovated building here. So you do this first, blow that up, then you build the STEM center. And the library renovation can take place separately from that because you're not having to worry about swing space or secondary effects of that building and so on. There are other changes on here. There's a public safety training center here. Think firefighter and police officer training. That may or may not end up there. I actually believe that we need a little more space than is envisioned there, and I would actually put that somewhere else off campus if I were doing it. So we have some internal conversations to go through about that. Culinary arts gets expanded here, so we have our Cessnon house right now in Pino Alto. We would build a modern space for them behind Cessnon House as a better location with more modern equipment. That kitchen and the things that are going bad in Cessnon are not good. So we had to close down finals week because of a water pipe break underneath the house, and it was just really bad. So things like that are happening on the campus constantly. Where a water pipe ruptures, we have to close down the facility, repair it, fix it, let the students back in. Doing that during finals week is not good for their learning and for our operations. So with that, I'm going to stop and allow you to ask questions of me without tying myself up. Thank you for your patience. Questions? Yes.
I'm just curious, a lot of these things feed into industry, which is great, but does industry pay any portion of this educational and all the facilities that are there that are going to eventually benefit them?
Yeah, I think, so two responses to that. Industry partners are great, and they have been particularly great, I will say, in our healthcare area. So, but they never pay for the full cost of what we're doing. But I will say, having come here from outside to this area, supporters like Sutter Pamph and the local dental hygiene community, and actually I would really give a lot of credit to our dental hygiene director in really hustling out there to get donations and support from vendors has been fantastic. But it's never enough. And so the way to fund those comes from two sources. One, there's federal dollars in the Perkins Act that even K-12 districts benefit from, but community colleges through the state get a funding source from the feds through the state chancellor's office for equipment, technology acquisition, for career training programs. And our our annual supplement of that money is usually around $350,000 to $400,000. And if you think about the wide variety of programs that we run that might be in computer science, culinary arts, health careers, dental hygiene, all those kinds of programs, $400,000 isn't going to go very far very fast. It gets consumed pretty quickly, right? So you do need to have, at least in the mind of voters and local supporters, that for major renovations and changes in projects and major facelifts, you have to do it with local voter support and property taxes, or it doesn't get done. And so the example I would use from my prior work is we had at Delta College trades programs in welding, electrical, automotive, air conditioning, and they were all in one part of the campus. And during the recession, the college closed down a construction carpentry program because no homes were getting built. There was no job demand at all. And so at that college, what the college did is they had about $10 million in bond money left from their 2014 bond. And we captured the carpentry space to renovate it for electrical. They got more room and new digs and new equipment. Then when they left their space, electrical, we renovated that space for AC, air conditioning. They got more room, new equipment. And so through a series of leapfrog projects where we were renovating the space, allowing the program to move in, go in, fix that space, allow a new program to move in. So over a 2.5-year period, we spent $10 million upgrading all of the trades programs in that way. But the only way we could do it is we knew we had $10 million left on a bond to do that sequence of projects, right? So the trick then is to go to the voters, if we do go to the voters and ask for a reasonable amount of money for projects that make sense to our community. And so that's going to be the ask, I think, of the board and myself, of going around and doing these kinds of presentations, right? What kinds of projects do we want the college to be going after to support the training needs and the education needs of our workforce, right?
And what was the dollar amount of the one that failed?
That one was $310 million, right? And so the polling that we just did, to give you an indication of what we were thinking and testing, was we had a split sample in the poll where we asked half of the voters less than 310. So we said, imagine $275 million bond that would do these things. And then the other half of the sample got a question on $325 million. So more than the last bond, one less than. And perhaps not surprisingly, the support was higher for the lower dollar value. 5% difference, right?
Yeah, there's a shortage in workers in what we call the trades, the plumbers, electricians.
Yes.
What is Cabrillo doing?
Cabrillo's programs are focused on construction and energy management, and they're based in the Watsonville Solari Center. And so the prime emphasis of that particular program is probably going forward going to be more on, well, it's in carpentry, it's in welding, and it's in, it will increasingly be in HVAC, in heating, ventilation. You know, this coast for many years has not had to worry about things like air conditioning. Increasingly, it's a problem to worry about. And you're right. So the need is there. We just hired a new faculty member in construction energy management literally 2 weeks ago. He's going to the board for approval on June 10th, next week. Go ahead.
Any thoughts to reestablish a North China presence? At one time there was something.
There was. Yeah.
And you mentioned maybe some firefighter training maybe being somewhere else. So any possibility of that?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple ways of thinking about the possibilities. Ideally for me, this is just me thinking out loud. So the Training Center for Public Safety has both training value for career technical programs and getting workers for our local firefighters and police agencies. But it also has professional development opportunities for thinking about firefighters from around the state, for example, coming in for safety trainings or operations emergency training because of where we are, quite frankly. So proximity to Highway 1 is important, or Highway 17, I think, as a thought process for where you place that kind of a facility. Outside of that, what I don't think is the best idea is to have that right on our campus next to the Child Development Center. That makes no sense to me. So I don't think the space is right, and I don't think we have enough space for it in terms of acreage of a really good emergency ops kind of center. So I'm open to a lot of different ideas and love to talk. Yes?
I have a question. So if we need space, why does the junior college Cabrillo need a football team or a football field?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the trades, it's moving into the trades, you need space, we need fire,
Yep.
The police department buildings. But, I hear $1 million goes into new turf, the football field.
Yep.
And why, is this just, and does the NFL give money to that, to these colleges? Or
Boy, I wish. These questions are getting hot now. I got to get my jacket off. I'll give you my philosophy on athletics, okay? And it may resonate, it may not. So I come out of a Catholic education tradition, and through my Catholic training, both through grade school, high school, and college, I read a lot of philosophy, religious and political philosophy. So I go back to the Aristotelian approach of the whole person, right? I believe that athletics and the building of the body with the mind is the way to think of being a full human, right? But I'll advocate for athletics and programs like football on an even higher level than that. Athletics to me is a student success program. So athletes who participate in team competition and practice get a lot out of what they do, both in building their mind and building their value set to be good citizens in the future. And what happens when you have teams is they end up practicing together, they end up studying together, they have coaches who monitor their progress a lot. They, guess what? They complete at higher rates and have higher GPAs than the normal student body, right? So you need to think of athletics as equivalent to running an honors program, maybe a little more expensive, I admit, right? We don't need field turf for our honors program. We just give them chalk, right? I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm going to just hold it like this.
No, that's okay. Just set it down. I'm going to unplug it.
I'm going to hold it like this. So what athletics does is actually generate some of our best completion rates. And so I look at the investment in a whole coaching staff and a kinesiology program and physical fitness and wellness as investments in student success. And by the way, a lot of those football players you think about, they go on and they transfer. A lot of them come back. A lot of them want to be firefighters, or they go and outgoing for police recruitment tests. And so they are our future workforce, and to me, that's how I look at them. Because when I was at Delta College, we got the same questions when the economy went really bad. Why are we running $1 million athletics program? Cut the spending on sports and focus on the real stuff. And what my president there and what I was advocating as vice president is, okay, if we eliminate football, volleyball, basketball, you're actually eliminating some of the best success stories that we have as a community college. So think about those kinds of practices, cohort-based learning, where they're tight with each other, they're monitored by their coaches and their advisors really well. Those are the kind of practices I want in all the other kinds of programs to ensure that they're completing their programs as well. So I'm a big advocate for athletics, which may grate on some people, But you have to know, I also come out of a background of that philosophy I mentioned, and also I was a swimmer when I was a kid. I swam through high school. I didn't quite get good enough for a college scholarship, but I understand the value of college sports for college athletes and how they succeed. So.
Oh, we're going to need
Oh.
to stop the questions because we have.
Barbara, thank you so much for the invitation, for letting me be here. I appreciate it.